Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for another PB&J card class. And in today's video, I am going to be doing lots of inking with our creative die called Floral Arrangement, and also doing some background inking and lots of die cutting on this card. And I really love sort of mixing up these bright springtime flowers and fresh greens with some more sort of grungy and neutral backgrounds. And real quick before we get started, I just wanted to pop up the supply list for today's cards, but I will put that back up on screen at the very end of the video, so if you want to look at it in more detail, you can pause the video and do so at that time. So here's a look at the card that we'll be creating today and that gorgeous floral arrangement creative die. I just love this die. There's so many different ways you could use it on your card, and it's very easy and simple to ink up. So I've cut it twice from Neenah Solar White cardstock, which is a nice thick but also very smooth cardstock. And from this die, I trimmed off a sort of a sprig of leaves and one large leaf. And then I'm also going to just really easily trim apart the flowers from the rest of the leaves. So I'm going to use the flowers from this and then that sprig and that other large leaf. And I'll be putting that on top of the other full piece that I cut. And I think that'll make a lot more sense as we get a little bit closer here. So I've cut those extra pieces, and here you can see how I'm just kind of playing with that arrangement. Now I'm going to be doing all of my inking with Ranger archival inks, and I will use a couple of distress inks too. But the colorful inks are from the Wendy Vecchi designer series, and I really love her colors. She has some new colors out, and then also some new mini ink pads in some of my favorite colors. So I'm going to be using all of these here to ink up my dies, and I'll have the exact colors listed at the very end of the video on the supply list, so which ones I used for the leaves and each of the color combos on the flowers. So to start with here, I am using the really beautiful prickly pear green, and I love the freshness and the brightness that this color adds. And I'm adding the ink using an ink blending tool and a foam pad, and I'm just using a pouncing motion on top of the leaves. I'm not worried about getting any shading, just coloring them with this ink. I've done the full die cut piece and then also the leaves that I trimmed off the other one. And I'm not worried about having that green go over the flowers on this larger piece because I will layer the others on top. Now this is the detail blending tool, and it has a very small foam pad at the very end. This is by Ranger, and it's really great for adding some shading to all of these leaves. So I'm going to use this color of peat moss. I'm just going to pounce my blending tool into that ink pad and then apply the inks on top of the leaves. I'm concentrating the color onto sort of the branch portion of the die and the base of the leaf where it's closest to the branch. And I apologize, my fingers are kind of in the way, but I had the, it worked best when I applied the ink with it at pretty much like a 90-degree angle to the table. And so it's a little bit difficult to capture on camera, but you can see, you can get all of the beautiful detail of these die cuts. You can ink them up using this blending tool because you have a lot of control of where you're putting that color. So you get this great shading to the die, which is really fun. And the color that I'm using here is called peat moss. So the combination of that prickly pear and that peat moss color really create some gorgeous leaves. There's that tip on the tip of the leaf, that real bright color, but it gets darker and more earthy as it moves down towards the base of the leaf. Now I did trim apart the flowers here. You could also keep them together. I just wanted a little more control. So for the blue flowers, I'm going to use the sky blue blending tool. And I am again applying this with an ink blending tool and a foam pad, and this is the sky blue ink pad, excuse me. And for the smaller flowers, I wanted to leave just a little bit more lightness to those flowers, and then on the larger one, go a little bit darker. So I will use the heavier pressure and more layers of ink on the larger flower. And that's why I trimmed them apart, so I'd have a little bit more control to keep the smaller flowers lighter and this one darker. So you can see that there. Now to add the shading to these flowers, I'm going to use the color of Bluebird. So the sky blue and the Bluebird are a really nice combination. And again, I'm using that detail blending tool from Ranger with the foam pad on the tip. And I'm so sorry you can't see that, but this is so perfect for these little flower centers. You can just place it right on the center of the flower and sort of work your way out in a circular motion and just add great shading. And one thing I especially love about this particular creative die called Floral Arrangement from Penny Black is that it has a lot of detail that cuts into the die. So you can see here on the flowers you get those lines for the petals and sort of the piercing or the dots in the center of the die. So it captures so much detail just with the die itself. When you add your inks on top, it just accentuates the detail that's a part of the die. So it's a great die. If you like to do inking, it's a really great die for that. Now for this flower, I'm just adding more layers of that dark color with the detail ink blending tool with the bluebird color. Concentrating the darker color sort of near the center of the flower and then lightening it up as I head out towards the outer edges. And then to finish off these flowers and kind of tie into the sort of grungy neutral look I'm going to add to the background, I am taking Gathered Twigs Distress ink, just very lightly pouncing that around the edges of the flowers. So now I'm going to pull back that die where I had inked the leaves. And I'm just putting a few dots of glue here and there. And I will adhere down those flowers just right on top. And you will see I missed one of the leaves there when I was doing the shading with the darker color, but I did just go back with that detail blending tool and I was able to put that darker peat moss color on that leaf. So here's just a closer look at those blue flowers. I find that these archival inks dry with a really pretty sort of satin finish once they're completely dry, and it just adds to that sort of soft, grungy look. Now I did 3 other color variations, and I've just sped up the video real quick here, but I wanted to share with you the color combinations to create the other colors, and I'm following the same process and using that same floral arrangement die. So for this red flower, the first layer of color is the Poppy archival ink, and then next I will add red geranium. And I am adding that with the detail ink blending tool. It takes a little bit more time to add that darker color onto these larger flowers because initially I did ink them up with more layers of ink so they're darker, but it goes really fast on the small ones. And actually I ended up liking the smaller flowers where I added the lighter base color the best because I think they had the most contrast and sort of area of highlight on them, and you'll kind of get a look at that here on these smaller ones. Sometimes less is definitely more. And again, how I can just pounce that ink right there onto the center of the flowers. And I'll go around the edges with Gathered Twigs just like I did with the blue flower. And then here's just a close-up of those red flowers and those just beautiful colors. For the purple flowers, I'm using the first color is Violet. Applying it with an ink blending tool and a foam pad. This color really reminded me of that first color I put on the leaves, the prickly pear. It just has this brightness and freshness to it that when you put the darker color on top, it just glows beneath it. So the darker color here that I'm using is called Thistle. And again, using that detail blending tool. Now I will show, once I do all of these flowers and show the inking for that, I will show how to complete the card and ink the backgrounds. But I just wanted to take a little time here to show you these beautiful colors and just how they can change the look even of the same die. So I love dies that are really versatile, that you can change the look just by changing the colors or the way that you arrange it on the page. And this is definitely one of those dies. And here's just a peek at those colors once they were finished. And again, you can see, especially on those smaller flowers, that beautiful glow that you get from that first layer of the violet color. Now for the final flower, I'm doing sort of an orange color, but it has sort of a pinkish peach hue to it. I really love the way this turned out. So the first color that I'm using is Tea Rose. And again, a heavier application on the large flower and a little bit less on the two smaller flowers. And then for the darker color combination with that, I'm using the orange blossom. And just working that in with the detail blending tool. You can see there, just by really pouncing it with a heavy pressure right on the center, you can get a nice deep center to that flower, which gives it even more dimension. Even though it will be glued flat on the leaves, it just makes it look a lot fuller by having that dark center sort of look like that's receding down into the flower. And just a lighter application on the centers of these two flowers. And I will go around the outer edges of this with the Gathered Twigs Distress ink as well. And here's just a closer look then at those finished sort of orange peach flowers. Now to finish out this card design, for the background layer, I'm using our Stitched Square and Circles die set, and I'm using just the square. I love the stitching element on this. I think it adds so much. And I'm going to ink it to begin with Antique Linen Distress ink, starting off of the edge and working my way on in a circular motion, using an ink blending tool with a foam pad. Starting light and just building up the color by doing several layers. I'm doing this on two corners of the background and trying to leave sort of a glow of white from the top right down to the bottom left. Now I'll add a little bit of Gathered Twigs Distress ink around those same areas, but not going in quite as far as I did with the antique linen. And then finally, I'm going to take this new archival ink color called Acorn and just add a little bit of it on those corners. And it just gives it this really beautiful grungy, sort of almost old paper, burnt sort of look on those corners. I love this color. And it complements well with the Gathered Twigs and the Antique Linen, which are two colors that I really like to use a lot. And I can see now using them a lot with this Acorn color. Now for the sentiment, I'm going to do a panel with our antique frame die cut and then also use the Creative Die Hello frame. I'm using the word hello from that. So all of these again were cut from Neenah's Solar White cardstock, and then I'm just going to pop this right back into the metal die. And then using my ink blending tool and a foam pad, I'm going to pounce on some of this Antique Linen Distress ink. And if it moves on you, it's really not a big deal. You can just pop it back in and keep inking. And then I'll add another little bit of Gathered Twigs right on top, and that will tie into the background inking that we've already done. And I like how once you remove the die from the paper, you get that really nice border of white around the outer edge. Now this is that die cut hello, and I'm just going to pounce this with that Acorn archival ink, that Wendy Vecchi color, and it's just such a nice rich brown, and then this will tie into those corners where we added that darker color on the background. So we're ready to assemble everything. I've put foam squares on the back of that antique frame die cut. For the parts of the flower that will be touching the background, I have added foam squares, and the parts that are touching that antique frame die, those I'll put some dots of glue on those to hold those down. Now these are those extra pieces I trimmed, and that's what I love about this die is that you can just you can add to it, build with it just by trimming off extra pieces and make it fit whatever style of card you're working on or the size of your sentiment. I'm adding a few dots of adhesive on a few spots here just to hold those down to the frame. I'll put some adhesive on the back of my die cut sentiment. And then I'll kind of slide that underneath the flower and adhere that down. And then just to finish things off, I will add just a few little gems to the background, sort of help lead the eye from that top left corner down to the right as the flowers and the leaves do that as well. So here's another look at that finished card. And I also used all of those other colorful flowers and assembled a set of cards. I think this would be a really fun set to give as a gift set. So for somebody to use, hello cards are so handy because you can add a sentiment on the inside. Hello, happy birthday. Hello, thinking of you. They can really be used for any type of occasion. And to finish them off, I did mount that square die cut panel to a note card itself once everything was done. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, as well as on our website and blog. And I will link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned, here is that supply list that includes all of the stamps. Actually, I didn't use any stamps on this card. All of the dies, papers, and all of those wonderful Wendy Vecchi ink colors I used to do my inking. Thanks for watching.